Hi everyone, this is Hot Off the Cloud by cloudonaut, and we are your hosts, Andreas and
Michael.
And this is our weekly show that is all about AWS. We have the latest AWS news from the past week, and we have also your questions. So if you have any AWS related questions, feel free to send them in over the week using the hashtag #AskCloudonaut, or in case you're joining us live, just use the chat to ask your questions there, and we will do our very best to answer them at the end of the show. Before we start, Michael, so I want to highlight one piece of content that we dropped last week, which is another volume of the Builder's Diary. So the Builder's Diary is our series about practitioners who are building stuff on AWS, who are solving real-world problems on AWS. And I interviewed Peter Wright from TechRacer, and I was talking with him about serverless ETL, which comes down to Athena, S3, and either step functions or Airflow to orchestrate ETL pipelines, basically to prepare the data for data analytics or machine learning workloads. So check out the show notes for a link pointing you to the Builder's Diary. I think this was a very interesting episode.
Yes, Andreas. Maybe something else that happened last week is that we kind of restarted the user group in our city, which is in Stuttgart, Germany. So this was the first time after we stopped running on-site meetups because of the pandemic. And it is actually not so easy to restart an AWS user group. So people are not used anymore to go there every month. So I think it will take us a couple of months until we have enough people who are kind of trained to learn something about AWS every month. So if you are by any chance from the Stuttgart region, then check out the AWS user group in Stuttgart. And if you are from a different city in a different country or different continent, AWS has a great website where all the meetups are listed. And if you are interested in learning something about AWS while talking to other people, then this is really a good place to do that. And there are usually great talks, and then there is enough time to talk to other users and learn about their challenges and their also their successes, and so that's really a cool thing. So if you are interested in that, check out the AWS user groups, and the link will be in the show notes. And then Andreas, we also released something, right? Do you want to talk about it, or?
Yes, so yeah. Last week we released a new version of Bucket AV, which is our solution to scan S3 buckets for malware. And basically what we released is Bucket AV is now accepting a custom message format, which means basically you can send your own messages, basically use an SQS QSD API to integrate Bucket AV with your own applications. And on top of that, we also launched an EventBridge integration, which means you can also now use the EventBridge notifications for new objects in S3 buckets and use that to trigger a real-time scan. So that's basically the release from the past week.
All right, and I'm very excited about the custom message format, because this kind of provides us a lot of possibilities in the future to do cool things when we talk reporting. So lots of our customers are asking for better reporting capabilities, and this is a step in the background that is needed that we can deliver that. So that's really cool. Looking forward to implement some of those reporting things as well. All right. Last week, Andreas, I talked about the Athena Query Engine version 3. And I think what I said was that it is very easy to switch from version 2 to version 3. All the queries still run. Turns out that's not really correct, because I figured out a couple of queries that are not running anymore. So I downgraded our workspace back to version 2. So basically what we have is we have a Grafana dashboard that shows us some metrics, mostly from AWS Marketplace reports. And I would say I think 2 or 3 out of 10 queries are not working anymore, and the error message was so unspecific that I was not kind of able to fix it within a couple of minutes. So I just reverted back to version 2. And yeah, that's kind of a correction. So be careful when upgrading to version 3, not only because of the performance, but also because of your existing queries.
Yeah, I have a follow-up regarding the monitoring VPCs and the network address usage units. So we talked about that, I think, 2 shows before, and there's one thing that came to my mind. So I thought, it's important to monitor those metrics to make sure you're not hitting any limits. But what I noticed, and Steffen on Twitter mentioned that to me, is the problem that this metric is only per VPC. So it's not per subnet. So you could run into a shortage of IP addresses in one of your subnets without noticing it. So this is not helpful in that regard. So it might make sense to monitor those metrics, but I think you can only hit those metrics when you really run very, very large workloads on AWS. So for most of us, it's probably not too important to monitor those new VPC network address usage metrics. That's my follow-up. So one of the announcements is SQS announces an increased throughput quota for FIFO high throughput mode to 6,000 transactions per second. So I thought this is interesting because I was actually thinking of one of the issues that we have with Marbot. So our AWS monitoring solution, Marbot, is a serverless application. It uses a Kinesis data stream. So basically, we collect all incoming messages, alarms, notifications from our customers, and we very quickly store them in the Kinesis stream. And then we have Lambda functions that are processing those events. That's a very high level overview of our serverless architecture. And what the issue we have with this approach is that it's quite costly because you have to provision those Kinesis shards. And it's on the one hand, it's possible to basically auto-scale the number of shards, but in our use case, this doesn't work too or very good. And also the minimum that you have one shard is already quite expensive. So I thought maybe the SQS, so first of all, the first in, first out queues have a very similar behavior than our Kinesis data stream because they kind of guarantee the order. And now that they're increasing the throughput, I was thinking about maybe this would be an alternative for us to replace Kinesis data streams. And I looked it up, the numbers. So what is Kinesis data stream capable of? And what I found is that one shard, so each stream can consist of, I don't know if there's a limit, so you basically scale by adding more and more shards. And one shard supports up to 1,000 records per second for writes. So with one queue, with one SQS, first in, first out queue, you basically, from what I understand, you can replace 6 Kinesis shards, roundabout probably. Some details probably not included here. And I was just thinking about maybe this would be an option. And so in case our system grows to more than 6,000 transactions per second, it would also be possible to just add multiple queues. So not just one, but to use, 2, 3, and have event, event subscriptions for all those and point them to the same Lambda function, which should in theory work as well. So yeah, this was just my thoughts about this announcement. I don't know if you have any objections or ideas on that, Michael?
No, I don't. So I think that could be possible.
So I think it would reduce our monthly cost quite significantly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, as you mentioned, with Kinesis data stream is that it's not really, I mean, it's not fully pay per usage. So if you're not using it, you still pay for the shard hour. And yeah, so that's definitely a good fit if you want to be more like pay per request. So, Andreas, I looked into a news that was announcing that you can now access AWS, or basically as SSM parameters and secrets from Secrets Manager using a Lambda extension. So at the moment, if you are or if you try to get a value from parameter store from Secrets Manager, what you can do is in your Lambda function, you can just make the API call and get the value back. I mean, that's possible. But usually that's not the best implementation. So usually you implement caching. So every now and then, like for example, every minute or every 5 minutes, you reach out to the service and update the value that you have in your memory, because you don't want to make the call every time the Lambda is invoked, because for example, Secrets Manager API, first you have a rate limit, and second, it's expensive. So that's why you implement caching. All right, and I think someone at AWS thought, okay, let's solve this problem for all our customers. And that's what they kind of announced. And then I looked into the details a little bit, and then it is some interesting things here to note. First, this feature is implemented as a Lambda layer. So what is a Lambda layer? Basically, when you deploy your Lambda function, you can add layers. And those layers are kind of added to the functionality of your function. A layer can include code, but it can also include an extension. And basically what an extension is, it offers an HTTP interface. And in the case of the parameters and secrets Lambda extension, by default, it listens on port 2773. And then from your code, you make an HTTP request to localhost on this port. And then there's some like URL, like some path that you have to specify. And then the extension reaches out to the API, like the Secrets Manager or SSM, fetches the value, and for example, caches the value for you for a configurable amount of, I think it's seconds. So all the configuration happens over environment variables, so you can turn off the caching entirely. You can control the time to live of each item and a couple of other things. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of all this kind of plugin customization stuff that runs in your AWS account, and so kind of by definition you are responsible for fixing problems. So I would like a more native integration of this feature, because I think it's actually more complicated to deploy this extension instead of just implementing it on your own, because you also have to think about how do you test this. And then you have an SDK to mock up, and here you have this HTTP endpoint to mock, and it's different kind of technology. So it makes things more complicated. So I'm not fully convinced. So I'm not using it at the moment, and I don't have a use case. But if you are making lots of parameters or accessing lots of parameters and secrets from Lambda, then probably this is something to check out. The biggest problem that I had in the documentation from AWS, I mean, if you're not using extensions, then, I mean, how should I know that I have to make an HTTP call to localhost on this port 2773? I don't know. It's not mentioned in the docs. So the host and port is kind of missing. They only document the path. So you have to figure this out first, and then you can use it. But yeah, you can also change the port, by the way. It's also configurable. All right, Andreas, that's it. That's the Lambda extension news.
Yeah, so I heard about others complaining about that as well, that it's not really a new feature of the service, but it's basically kind of a additional thing that you can deploy with a Lambda layer. There's someone mentioned Lambda Power Tools, which has probably a similar issue, which should also be a feature, but it's not. So I think, it seems a little bit like they're blocked releasing the feature in any other way, and then this is their workaround. Instead of fixing it for the customer, they are going the shortcut, it seems. The next thing I want to talk is a service that you might not have heard about, which is the Amazon Interactive Video Service, which now includes web and mobile SDKs for Stream Chat. So I remember having a look into this service when it was brand new, which is about 2 years ago. And one thing that I was disappointed when I looked into it was that there were no SDKs. There was no way that you could embed the video stream and chat into a web application. So basically, what is interactive video service about? It's basically what we are doing on YouTube right now, a YouTube live stream, and that's basically the service from AWS to do the same. So it's for streaming video with adaptive bitrate at low latency. That's the promise, and you basically pay only when you use it. That's interesting. So yeah. And of course, there's no ads and stuff like on YouTube. So that might be a cool thing. And you can, of course, I don't know, have a paywall in front of it and stuff. Yeah, but now, so they included an SDK and you can, so I looked into the SDK very quickly and it seems, it looks very easy to use. So you can basically now build your own chat at the side of your video. Yeah, that's now integrated and comes with an SDK that you can use when building a JavaScript application. There's also an iOS version and an Android version as well. So that looked quite cool. Maybe we should have a look into that another time and stream on Amazon Interactive Video Service in the future instead of YouTube, or maybe in addition. The other thing that the announcement that caught my attention was the IAM Identity Center, which was formerly SSO, adds session management features for improved user experience and cloud security. And basically what we have now in the Identity Center is we can now configure the session duration. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. What happens when I change the session duration? So you can, I think before that, default was 8 hours, and now you can adjust it. And I tried to do so, but I could not see the effect. I don't know why. Maybe I'm missing something. And also, I was wondering if the AWS CLI integration that fetches those credentials for your terminal, if that applies, the session limit applies to that as well. It doesn't seem so, at least from what I've tested. And then I tested the second feature, which is you can now basically delete sessions of a user. So you can go to a user, show the active sessions and delete those, which is interesting, for example, when you very quickly have to remove a user and you don't want to have any sessions flying around. I tried that as well. I deleted my session, but I was still logged into the AWS Management Console. I was still logged into the portal, the SSO portal. So I'm not sure whether this feature is actually working. At least I couldn't get it to work. So maybe... I don't know, maybe it's something I'm doing wrong or something that is wrong with the feature. I'm not sure about that. I should open probably a support ticket for that.
Okay, that sounds cool. The next thing that I was like testing basically when I saw the announcement is that the AWS Management Console now supports a dark mode. So, I mean, a couple of years ago, I think Apple released something called the dark mode. So it is basically a way to kind of flip all your, or the whole UI into like from white to black kind of dominated background colors. So I think the promise is that it's for some people easier to read and stuff like this. And I think it took AWS a couple of like maybe 4 years or so to kind of implement this in the in their UI as well, and it's now in beta. And I just visited all the services that I have in my like the favorites bar, and it's not working for IAM and step functions at the moment. So those are still white. So I think what I really don't like is that if you are kind of browsing everything in dark mode and then you push a button and then everything boom goes white, and this is really annoying. So I hope you will clean this up soon. And I think, Andreas, you mentioned that there's probably a bug when you use Safari. So every time you visit a new service, it flashes quickly and turns white and then black. So yeah. I think like it's definitely interesting to see we think that this was quite a big effort for AWS to implement this across all their services and teams and so on. So this is a challenge. So
if someone wants to leak the hours that went into this feature, I would be very interested in that. I guess it's much too many hours spent on an unimportant feature. Okay, but besides that, I looked into another announcement, which is AWS Nitro Enclaves is now supported on AWS Graviton. So to be honest, so I looked into the Nitro Enclaves documentation and I don't get all of it. So it's quite complicated to understand what's going on there. So the management summary is those Nitro Enclaves are separate virtual machines emulated in a way on the hardware that is separating them from the rest of the virtualization in a very secure way. So that's basically the management summary in my own words. And so I think Apple is doing similar things with their security enclave that holds stuff like your fingerprint and stuff. So I think this is kind of a trend to have. I think it's also some of that is also implemented in hardware, and they're making sure that you have more secure parts of your machines. And I thought, okay, so what is the announcement here? So the announcement is that we now have it on Graviton as well, which was missing. So basically now most of the instance types support those Nitro Enclaves. And basically to use them, you use a part of your virtual machine, part of your EC2 instance, and define that this should be the Nitro Enclave belonging to the parent instance. That's what they named the whole thing then. And I thought, okay, what's the possible use case for that? So they list some use cases to process very data with high security requirements and stuff like that. But I think the one of the use cases I found that could be really interesting is that the AWS Certificate Manager for Nitro Enclaves allows you to use ACM certificates from AWS, not only for your load balancers and stuff, but also on an EC2 instance. And the way that works is it uses a Nitro Enclave, it runs the service there, and basically what then another operating service that you install is doing is it basically copies the latest certificate to your Nginx or Apache configuration. So they have basically built a small service that you can install from the packages, which is then updating your local certificates on a regular basis. So that's how it works. And it uses the Nitro Enclave to connect basically with the certificate manager. And by that, AWS has control over that whole pipeline and is able to basically allow you to use those certificates on your machines. So this could be an interesting use case, I would say.
Andreas, I have one thing that I was last week, or I was reading a cloud cost report from a company that does cloud cost analysis for their customers. Mm-hmm. And for their customer base, they calculated that 1% of EC2 workloads run on Graviton at the moment, and 20% on AMD based instances, and the rest runs on Intel. That was really, okay. I mean, it's just their customer base, but it's interesting. So I was expecting a definitely higher share of Graviton instances across.
Me too. Okay. So that maybe the nonsense is not too important. It's at least important to me because my machines run on Graviton.
Yeah, and this was just like a fun fact kind of thing. It's and like lots of workloads run on very old instance types. So this is just, I think it probably takes a long time to migrate basically.
Okay, Michael. So I want to highlight our partners and sponsors for this episode. So in case you're looking for a job, you probably know that AWS expertise is in high demand. And so our partner Demicon is hiring a senior lead full stack developer working remotely from Germany or within the EU. And if your favorite technology stack includes things like JavaScript, TypeScript, Angular, or React, and of course a lot of AWS for the backend and the infrastructure, then you should definitely check out this position at Demicon. And as well, our partner TechRacer is hiring, and they are looking for cloud consultants focusing on AWS and DevOps. So if you enjoy building infrastructure as code, run container workloads on AWS, then this is something for you. Join TechRacer in one of their offices in Hanover, Duisburg, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Munich, Vienna, Lisbon, or Lucerne. So you will find both job descriptions and the possibility to apply for those in the show notes.
All right, Andreas. So I have one lesson learned from last week. And I mentioned it already that I was kind of looking into ways to migrate from code pipeline to GitHub Actions. And I think one of the, what I'm doing at the moment is I write a blog post about the topic, but I want to share one thing that I learned. And this is that the way GitHub Actions works is that you can either run like a script, like a shell script or bash script, or you can invoke a GitHub action. And a GitHub action basically is a repository. And there are 2 GitHub actions from AWS that you probably want to use if you migrate from code pipeline to GitHub Actions. And this is, the one is about getting credentials, and the other one is about deploying CloudFormation stacks. And the name of the action is AWS CloudFormation GitHub deploy. And the first thing that I noticed that this repository is actually archived. So no one is maintaining it from AWS. Which is not good. It's never good. If you start using something and it's already not maintained, then it's probably not a good idea to use it in the first step. And then I used it, and what you can see in GitHub Actions in the logs is that there are a couple of deprecation warnings. One is about that they don't support Node 12 anymore as a runner or runtime environment, so you should update to Node 16 because Node 12 is end of life. And there's also something about a outdated output method. I don't know. Basically, they say the maintainer has to update to a new version of their core library. So problem is AWS is not doing this because it's an archived repository. So what I did is I forked the repository in our GitHub organization, and it's a public fork, so you can use it as well. And I modernized it, so I fixed all the deprecation stuff, and I also added new features. So I did a couple of cleanup activities and stuff like that. So what I think what this is definitely a superior way of deploying a CloudFormation stack in GitHub Actions. And the cool feature that I added, and this is the lesson learned here, is that in GitHub Actions, steps in a job run sequentially, and in code pipeline, you can run them in parallel. And that's not possible in GitHub Actions easily. So what I did in the CloudFormation GitHub deploy action, I just kind of extended it to support deploying multiple stacks at the same time. So basically, I added the parallelization into the action. And now you can deploy as many stacks as you wish, and you can also control the concurrency. So by default, it works on 5 stacks at a time, but you can modify this to your needs. So yeah, that's something that I learned that, I think one of the key pieces if you want to use GitHub Actions is not maintained by AWS anymore. So definitely check out our solution and feel free to open issues and stuff. So I'm working on this at the moment. So yeah, looking forward for feedback. That's my lesson learned, Andreas.
Very cool, Michael. So wow, I think we had a lot of stuff already for this week's show. So we talked through a lot of announcements. So I would like to wrap it up, Michael.
Yep.
And so next week we will have a break. So there will not be a new Hot of the Cloud show next week. But the week after that, we will be back on our weekly turn with Hot of the Cloud, and we're looking forward to that. So yeah, let us know what your thoughts are on this week's episode, and also don't forget to send us your questions. So all AWS related questions, use the hashtag #AskCloudOnaut or send us a direct message or use the comments section, whatever you like. Feel free to send in your questions. We're happy to try to answer them in the next show. So thank you very much, Michael. It was a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks all for listening. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.